Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor to bring to you tonight a wonderful poet, an extraordinary voice, a young woman known across the planet as a unique voice, as a witty, intelligent, and I think very special voice in the world of poetry today. I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Jennifer Leong, a tremendous poet who I've had the great honor to know for several years now. And I am never surprised at how wonderful, never surprised at how witty her work is. And she's one of those very unique poets who not only constructs with metaphors, who constructs with unique phrases and voices, but she also often includes little puzzles, little diagrammatic display of her poetry, a really extraordinary voice. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rick, for this honor. And it's really a privilege to come back again to catch up since our first discussion or interview. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. And
well, my pleasure.
Not sure that I can be considered young. Well, as a young poet, yes, but not as a young person in terms of chronological age. Yeah, but thank you.
Well, you may have been around the planet for a couple times, but your heart is young, your smile is lovely, and it is a great honor to have you. So let me ask you some questions. You know, as wonderful as our poetry Zooms are, and I find them endlessly engaging, hilarious. I would rather listen to poets talk than anything. But I'm always seized by the concern that I want to know more about the poet. I want to know more about the person. How was this poet? How were these insights developed? What were the forces on this person when they were young? What was their school experience like? What inspired them? So let's get started. First, my dear, when did you really start writing? When did you start writing for fun, writing for creativity, writing because you wanted to, not because you had to?
Well, I suppose I didn't really start with poetry. It was more like writing stories, and I used to enjoy writing argumentative pieces, where I take different perspectives, and then I will probably have to end up with a conclusion. Yeah. Not so much stories. I suppose the stories came along later when my kids were growing up, and we would make up stories, and we would tell each other stories or continue the story until somebody falls asleep. Yeah. And the next morning I would not remember what the story ended as, and they had to remind me, so what happened to that grandmother? So I said, oops, it was a grandmother. Yeah, so that's how it went. Not really writing. Yeah.
Now, when you were a youngster, when you were in school or in your home, did your parents, did your teachers encourage you to write? Did they say, wow, Jennifer, that's neat? Or was this really much self-driven rather than encouraged by your teachers and your parents?
I don't think anybody really encouraged me to write, at least not for poetry or for stories. It was more like bread and butter or to pass school exams, and they tend to be more factual, more argumentative things. It was only in 2021 when my friends and I came across this autism drive in Singapore. And that was just slightly after the lockdown. And we didn't want to run up staircases and do laps, swimming and all that. So we said, okay, let's try and do poetry. And at that point, I was having trouble even remembering how many syllables a haiku had. And we started that. And when that campaign ended in a few weeks, I was like, oh, it has ended. I just feel like I should be writing more. And then I went into Southeast Asia Poetry Writing Month, which was a Facebook group. And there I was awed by all the different poetry forms that Southeast Asia has. And yeah, because Singapore is in Southeast Asia and we don't really have very many poetry forms of our own. And I was just blown away by the possibilities, by what other countries had or have. And it's because they have a very long history. But Singapore is very young, so we don't really have that many poetry forms. So that's how I started. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you to educate my listeners and watchers just a little. You live in Singapore.
Yes.
How would you describe where Singapore is in the world? Many people know it might be in Asia. Could you help people understand where Singapore is?
Okay. It's easy for me because it's just 1 degree north of the equator. So we have tropical weather throughout, and we are known as the little red dot. So if you look at map of the world, you just look for something just slightly above the equator and look for a dot. And I would like to think that we are kind of like a melting pot where different cultures come together. And well, in terms of food, we really have a great choice of food. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So next I want to ask, so what you mentioned that the voices that you were hearing of other poets in the area were stimulating, were encouraging to you to write yourself. Were there any writers who particularly stand out to you from your early writing?
Not exactly. Actually, one of the things that stood out for me was when I heard languages that I did not understand, but they were reciting poetry. And I just thought it was very rich and very moving. So that was something that I always think is so important and so enriching if we could actually have more than one language in a poem, even if it's just 1 or 2 words, because when it's something that is in your own vernacular, in your own language, somehow or other it sort of like connects better. And it's always when somebody tries to speak, maybe just a thank you in your language, that you feel like, oh, okay, hi, this person is really trying to at least try to speak my language. And when I traveled recently last year, uh, this was in Spain, and most of the time they had signs that what is your language? That say, what is your language? And I really like that because they don't assume that you can speak that particular language that that particular place is known for. Yeah. So for me, multilingualism is quite important.
Now, one of the things I have to ask, because most poets don't create a visual structure, don't invite you to explore their poem. It's very linear. It starts, it goes down the page, and that is typically English language poetry. You read it, that's that. But I've always been intrigued because you invite the reader to explore, to have poems that are if you will, multidimensional. Here's a line here. It could be read forward. It could be read backwards. You can look here. You can look there. That is such an interesting idea, and there's so few poets that write that way. Were you inspired by some particular poet to do that, or is that just something that has come from your own creativity?
I don't think I was influenced by any particular poet. I'm actually very, well, I'm not a very, how would I say? I don't read a lot of poetry, and I am actually rather unschooled in poetry. So, but I do have a very poor sense of direction, or rather zero sense of direction. So I suppose I I would like to think that even if I go this way or I go that way, it would make sense. So maybe my poetry is a reflection of that.
That's a wonderful answer. Wow, that's really neat. That's really neat. One of my favorite poets is a poet named E. E. Cummings, who also creates what I call structural poetry. In other words, it's not just linear read down the line. That's what I write linear read down the line mostly. But he often will be very playful about how the words are set on the page. And again, invite not as advanced as you are. You are very unique in my experience. But he does play with words and plays with their position and how they're laid out. And I've always admired that about your work. You added a dimension to the world of poetry for me. Okay, so you started performing with the onset of COVID in 2020 and beyond, huh?
Well, I went on some Zooms and things like that. Yeah.
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 Okay, let me ask you, since we mentioned Zoom rooms, um, you've had a chance to talk, at least through the Zoom medium, to poets from across the globe. Is there anything that you learned about poets or about poetry from the Zooms that surprised you?
Hmm. Interesting. I think many of the poets are not that young in terms of chronological age. And I find that very, very interesting because in Singapore, people my age and older don't actually do poetry. Yep. And that was something that I was very wowed by because, yeah, because we don't, it's not, well, so far at least, it's not my experience that we have a lot of poets who are older in Singapore. Of course, the ones who are older are very, very precious to us. Yeah, but generally, people don't write poetry, and that's what I'm trying to do as well to introduce poetry to somebody who could be retired, could be a grandparent. So I run workshops at the National Library.
How nice. How nice.
Yes. To
Okay.
try poetry, basically to try poetry, because a lot of people say poetry is so difficult, but English is not good enough. Because we have four official languages here, so some of us may not be so comfortable in English. So, well, so my answer to them is you don't have to write in English. And the poetry form that I came up with through divine inspiration actually doesn't need you to write in English. So you can write in Malay or in Tamil or in Mandarin. In Chinese, it's fine. Yeah. In fact, if you write in English, you have more rules to follow. So it's like a punishment. Yeah. And that's the only language I can write properly in, actually. So yeah.
I had a friend ask me just the other day, he said, so you go to these international forums and well, how do you understand? And I said, well, many people do. For those, too many of us are monolingual from the West, and we only speak
I am
one.
as well, almost. Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, so most poets across the globe, there's a wonderful poetry community who speaks English for those of us who only speak one or a smattering of a second language. I said, but when I meet a poet who speaks their poetry in another language, then I'm not listening to the ideas, I'm listening to the music, I'm listening to the sounds of their words, I'm listening
Yes.
to the emotion that they're displaying, because human emotions are very finite. You know, there's the happy range, there's the puzzled range, there's the angry range, and humans have been doing the same things, having the same troubles for hundreds of thousands of years, I think. So there's something, even just if you listen to the music. Okay, next question. Now, there is a range of opinion among poets. Some poets ascribe to the theory that you should write every day, that writing every day is important to polish your craft. Other poets, on the other side of the spectrum, say, Oh my gosh, don't force it. Only write when you're inspired, when the light shines on you, when your muse knocks at your door, and somewhere in between that extreme is Jennifer. Where are you in that? Do you write every day? Or do you feel guilty about not writing every day? Or do you say, no, no, I wait for inspiration? Is Jennifer in that spectrum?
No, I think I'm quite odd because I write every day and anything can be the topic. I wrote one on hair ties, just to, like little rubber bands that you use to tie your hair, because I happen to see hair ties on the floor. So anything can spin off a poem in that sense. And I subscribe to the view that you don't need to travel far and wide to write poetry. I mean, of course, the spectacular stuff that you see, when let's say I go to the US, I see all these open areas, the mountains and all that. Those are very inspiring, but I don't really have to go there. I can actually just look at a fan, an electric fan, just turning and rotating, and something can click with me and something can come out. You know what I mean? So I'm a firm believer in you write when you want to write. I think it's not something that I want to put a benchmark on and say, oh, yardstick, and say, okay, I've done like 20,000 poems in 20 years, or I have written 20,000 lines in a day. So I don't think I want to quantify. Actually, my counting skills are not good either. So I suppose I don't really want to get there. So yeah, so to me, it's more like you just write when you want to write. And it's something that has to come out. I feel that you just cannot keep it lidded. So you just want to write, either because when I'm very, very sad and I don't really know how to process my feelings or my emotions, my thoughts, and everything is just going around. And I'm a visual person, so I put the words like in the air in my mind, like a mind map. And then after that, I just create words around each word, create stanzas or standalone haiku-like short poems around each word. And that helps me to ground myself. It's like architecture, it's just like scaffolding, right? I mean, you just build from the ground up and then you see how many more layers you can go. If it doesn't go anywhere further, you just stop. So it's yeah, and I also think that forms are useful. Um, but if the poem doesn't seem to go anywhere with that form, we don't have to just squeeze that poem into that form. So it's like squeezing a square peg into a round hole. So I don't believe in like I don't believe in breaking rules either, but I don't believe in forcing into a form. Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this. Um, Many people in the West feel that poetry is sort of over on the side. There's important writing, of course, there's facts and fiction, but over there, someplace stranger than theater, it's way over there and almost an irrelevancy. I have my disagreements with that kind of thinking, but I was wondering, to you, is poetry important?
Yes, it is very important because now I have seen poetry work for me, and I want to recommend it to as many people as possible, especially people in my country who are not very well versed in poetry. Not that I am, but I've tasted the goodness of it. So I would like to share it with people. And it's not something that once I share, I lose it, right? So, as you share, actually more comes out from you to give. because it's something that comes from inside out. It's not like somebody hands me a parcel and I just pass the parcel on. And it's good for the soul. To me, it's poetry. Poetry is actually not just words, not just it's something special because there are words involved. Music is beautiful and it can actually bring a lot of emotions in and all that, but I think there's something about poetry because of the words. It's like the human voice too. Instruments can play beautiful music, but it's not the same as if a human were to sing it. So I suppose to me, poetry is that because of the words. Yeah.
My typical answer to the non-poet, to the non-believer in the power of poetry is, well, they wouldn't chant at sports games if poetry didn't work to build enthusiasm.
Yeah.
They wouldn't use it in songs. They wouldn't use it in advertising if it wasn't an effective way of grabbing your attention. And since I have had those experiences, they use it in war. Soldiers use it.
Yes.
When they are energizing athletes to go and win whatever their sport is, they have chants.
Yes.
What is a chant but poetry? And I think I don't need to make any argument beyond that. If it wasn't useful, they wouldn't use it. Okay, next question. Is there themes that you return to again and again? Are there topics that you address and have addressed over and over?
I think it's the voice. Am I heard? Silence. So it's silence, voice. Am I heard? Am I seen? If I don't speak, if you don't hear my voice, do you see me? Or if you see me, but you don't let me speak. So it's a lot of between, I suppose, being seen and being heard. Yeah.
Okay. Um, Now, this is a difficult question, and if you would prefer not to address it, that's fine. Just let me know and we'll go by it.
Okay.
But do you feel that poets have a responsibility to their society to talk about important issues?
Well, I don't really know how to answer that question because I do it from a very personal angle. So when I write, I don't actually argue for or against something. It's just my personal opinion or feelings or my take on like what I said, like the hairband or the electric fan at that moment. So I don't see myself as a poet who would say get into taking sides, say in a particular um setting. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
What makes a good poet?
Wow. I think everybody. I don't know. Wow. I think anybody can be a good poet as long as you're authentic. That's what I think. Yeah.
What a great point. I absolutely agree. I often say to my friends, my colleagues, in the world that we live in, there is so much inauthenticity. There is so much propaganda or marketing or whatever you want to call it, spin.
Yes.
But in the poetry Zoom space, in among poets, they speak from the heart. You're
Yes.
going to hear truth. Now, it may be their particular truth. They may even be wrong, but it's their honest, particular truth. That much you can count on, and that I find very refreshing.
Yes. Yes. And that's why we can connect. I mean, in the sense that we may have very different viewpoints on many, many things, but we know that whatever we say is what we really, really believe in. So, of course, our beliefs might be like what you say, could be totally wrong, right? But maybe I believe in electric fans, like that there'll be they will save us from the end of the world or something. But yeah, so is that authenticity which is special in poetry. And
Okay,
having
last,
said that, right, it's the other way as well, because then people can read you so well, right, through your poetry. So that's scary too.
two last questions. Number one, what are you reading right now? Is there some reading on your desk right now?
The Bible. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And my last question is, do you have a question for me?
Okay. Yes, I do. Why do you do these interviews? I'm just very curious.
Well, it's very simple. Because as a person that has tried my whole life to write the truth, I find spending time with artists, with poets, so wonderful and so nourishing. And as as much as I love our Zoom meetings because they have introduced me to so many wonderful, amazing, inspiring poets, poets like yourself. But still, part of me says, but I don't know Jennifer well enough. I want to know, what was her childhood like? What were her teachers helpful? Were they strict? What adventures in her life said to her, I have to write? Because that to me is such a beautiful thing. I find the creative spirit just overwhelming and beautiful. So if I get to spend an extra minute with an artist, a poet like you, boy, I'm there. I'm there. And I had worked in media before. I worked in television, I worked in radio, I wrote on the web, I wrote marketing. I wrote a lot of marketing where it's so much, let's be kind, baloney, okay? Just junk. That when I finished, I did a news show for 11 years because there's a lot of news that's not covered. So I interviewed scientists, I interviewed activists, I interviewed people who were calling on our humanity, which because I thought that was important. But after a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to artists. I needed that nourishment in my soul. So that's why I do Poets of the East. I get to talk to poets. That's pretty good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the answer as well. So encouraging. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, the fun part. Can I ask you to read some of your poetry, my dear?
Sure. I'm going to start with the dinosaur one. That's where we ended the
Okay.
first. Yeah. So this is the dinosaur one. I'll try and share screen.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me set that up.
Okay. So this is the dinosaur poem, and it's called Bronto, not Bruno. It's yeah. So remember you ended the previous interview with Brontosaurus, not really a real dinosaur at that point, and it was just a teenage diplo. So here goes Bronto, not Bruno. Distant past, a long, long, long time ago, in a far, far away land, Bronto asked his dad, what is extinction? Is it new? Is it scary as a T-Rex? Does it mew? Dad's indistinct answer was muttered in a whisper. My boy, you must stop uttering that E word. We Bronto dinosaurs should stick to just the letter D for distinction. Pick all your friends, school, drinks, words, hobbies, habitat, leaves carefully. So this was written in 2022. Thank you. The next poem is Hills. This was the poem that won the Spirit of the Festival Award in Ireland at the Francis Brown Literary Festival Multilingual Poetry Competition in 2022. And the photos were put in place after I arrived in Ireland and took all these photos, but the poem was written before that. So it's not that it's the other way around. So the poem came first and then the photos, not the photos and then the poem. Right, so this is hills. The hills are alive. The volcano looks dormant, but within it boils in great strife. Looks are deceiving. Can't make assumptions about the plateau and why it's shrinking. Plato's platitudes and a random thought. Why does Platonist rhyme with cartoonist? Lago itu meminta kita. Climb every mountain. Is that for the youth elixir fountain? It's impossible. The air is thinning. It is palpable. La tensión es helada. Se puede cortar con un cuchillo. The temperature drops in tandem with hair. Waterfalls. Age is a catch-all. Age, timeless fashion accessorizes to make a mountain out of a molehill. There are many moles. Some are on the face. Those that lie hidden aren't gems, but burdens. The song's repeating its request to climb and its charming chime, but on my terms. Ishan hayo Ishan Gao. No comparison, please, except with one's old self, old burdens. I say we tackle only the next hill, one step at a time, uphill and downhill. So just a little bit of a footnote. So the words in Spanish means that the tension is icy, sliceable with a knife, and the Chinese words means the Chinese phrase is there's always a higher mountain. It usually means that there's always someone better. And this was written in the Dua Tres Penta Step poetry form. And I will go into that a little bit later. And I think in the first interview, I talked about Barrel and Soil being the first ever poem written in the Dua Tres Penta Step poetry form. And today is the third birthday of the Dua Tres Penta Step form. It was created on 22/4/22. And today is 22/4/25. At least here, I know it's still 21st of April in where you are, Rick. So this is Tears and Lamentations, and this artwork is by my friend Angela Ang. And I will give you the context for this. And then this is Tears, the letter T. So, and you can see the tear here. The fire is because when I was about to leave for the airport to go to Ireland to attend the ceremony for the shortlisted poetry, the poems, and at the point I didn't even know whether Hills was going to be winning anything at all. Just before I left, I received a message that the festival was postponed, and I was just quite disappointed, of course, and devastated. And the first thing that came to me was, this is a scam. Like, they asked me to enter the competition and then it actually doesn't exist. But I turned on the radio and BBC made an announcement that there was a huge fire near where the festival was going to be. And it was a petrol kiosk fire and 10 people perished in that particular fire. So I was like, wow, so this is real. At the same time, I was grappling with a lot of thoughts and everything, yet I had to leave, right? Because it was already time to go to the airport. So I went and when I was there, this was actually Tears and Lamentations is my epiphanous piece, where I discovered, for me, poetry is not just about creating new forms, having wordplay, having fun, conforming to forms, or even, like doing whatever things that we do with words. But it was something that helped me to grapple with my disappointment, my emotions, my thoughts, and to help me in the process of actually healing and grieving with other people or sharing joy with other people as well. So when I was there, I wrote Tears Lamentations after I visited Trinity College, Dublin, where they had displayed, I think it's still on display there, the Book of Kells, which was actually a book that was written in handwriting manuscript. And every chapter of the four Gospels would have a stylized kind of beginning of that chapter. So if it's an F or a T, they would just decorate it. So having seen that, and I was kind of like inspired by that as well. And just before I left for Ireland, my friend from church, Angela, asked if I would be doing a poetry book. I said, no, 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 I'm not doing any book. But when I was done with Tears and Lamentations, I contacted her and said, hey, I'm not doing a book, but would you like to draw? And then this is what she did for the fire and the tears. And I sent her pictures of the Book of Kells alphabets, the stylized manuscript. So here's Tears and Lamentations. And it's in the word tres pentastep form, meaning that there are two lines that end rhyme in every stanza. And also dua means two in Malay, so two, and there are also at least words of at least two languages in here. And it's tres because it's three in Spanish, and we write this in a layout where it's like 3 columns. And then there are 4 lines in each stanza. And 5 is because penta is 5 in Greek. It's because every line has 5 syllables, like a haiku in a sense, except when you write in a language other than in English. So if you squeeze in a word there that is not English, you can get away with not following the 5-syllabic rule. So actually you can write the entire thing in, say, Mandarin or Chinese, right? And then you don't even have to do 5 syllables per line. But it still has to follow. If you want to comply with that dual tres pentastep form, then you would have to, how would I say, you would have to still have the end rhymes and all that. So anyway, I'll just read some stanzas of Tears and Lamentations because it's quite long. Yeah. And the stanzas can be jumbled up in the sense that you can read the last stanza first and so on. So this is what you were mentioning as well, Rick, just now. So yeah, so here goes Tears and Lamentations. Unexpectedly, Hills was shortlisted for the festival. I was elated. The devastation, 10 lives were taken in an explosion consumed by fire. Eyes pour streams of tears, though eyes may be closed. Their tears flow past throats choked with newfound fears. Layers of dust and ashes fly. They sting the eyes, they nestle. They yearn to settle. Dreams shatter, become nightmares of desolation, yet obstacles flutter. Dice mi alma, oh my weary thoughts, lament and ferment the same tears they fought. Community is solidarity, it is sympathy. Oh wow. It does not matter that salinity of my tears, how I speak and write differ. When one of us hurts, all hurt together, no matter whether I'm from here or not. Grief hears the heart speak without suppression. There's sufficiency in its expression. There is no border, no impediment, even if native tongues are different. One day, he will wipe all tears from our eyes and we'll say goodbye to crying and death. So this is the write-up of the dual tres pentastep form. And this was Tears and Lamentations, where I extracted from it certain stanzas, and they form a twin cinema poem where we can read across and downwards. And I didn't have to change a word. Somehow or other, they just fit into twin cinema as well. And then this is Tears and Lamentations in another poetry form that comes from Singapore, is the Anima Methodi form. And here there are 2 stanzas. So there's one stanza here, and there are words that are in common between the first and the second stanzas, and the center part of the poem actually has a volta, so it actually turns the theme to something else. And this was actually shared at the National Library last week, where I ran a try poetry workshop. And it was really it was unimaginable because Celine McGlynn, who is the chairperson of the Francis Brown Literary Festival, was there too. And it was very interesting because just about 2.5 weeks ago, I just had this idea that I would contact her. And I hadn't contacted her ever since I met her in October 2022. The festival was postponed, but because I had flown all the way there, she met me with some of her friends and committee members. So I just had this idea that maybe I should just contact her. And I had lost her phone number because I dropped my phone and all that. So I emailed the festival people. It's like info at. So it's like a long shot. So I said, hi, I'm actually trying to get in touch with Celine. And lo and behold, she replied a few days later. She said, hi, I'm in Singapore. And, so I said, oh, I'm doing this. And then we met up and she said she would come and try poetry with me at the National Library. So it was amazing because I had to warn her that this is for people who have probably never written poetry in their lives. And I mean, she comes from a background where she's organizing festivals, right? So, it was, to me, it's like she's so high up there and I'm doing this very childish thing where I'm like trying to get people to try poetry. But she was so nice and she was so encouraging. She said, we are all beginners. So that was really amazing. I mean, I would have not imagined that after 2 over years of not being in contact, suddenly she appears in the poetry workshop that I was running. And then we could also hear from her as to how the festival was and how the fire was. So all these connections, I mean, if you had told me like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago that I'll be doing this, I would say that is a crazy idea, but this is what has happened. Yeah, so actually I posted some stuff on Facebook about that particular workshop, and also I wrote a poem after that. Anyway, now moving on to authenticity. So there was one day when I saw this plants here, and they looked so green that I didn't know whether they were real. So I had to go nearer to it, and then this haiku came up. The leaves are so green they warrant a closer look to check for plastic. Because in Singapore, we sometimes get plastic plants. We don't have time to water the plants. So, yeah, we do get plastic plants for decorating the place. And this poem can also be read from the last line upwards. To check for plastic, they warrant a closer look. The leaves are so green. Yeah, so the answer is these plants are real. And I told my friend who was in charge of landscape, hey, I actually thought that they were not real. But she said, no, they're real. And I saw it for myself, so it's real. The next poem I would like to share is called Finding Somebody. This is a very interesting poem because it just wrote itself in that sense. I couldn't type fast enough and the words were just tumbling out. Yeah, and it's not in any form or whatever. It's just finding somebody. How does one find oneself, particularly when you are Nemo? When Nemo is Latin for nobody. Nemo is the anagram of omen. Does that portend trouble? Or because it's spelled in reverse, somewhere within the rearrangement of the atoms and electrons belonging to the four letters, a magic spell is invoked that foretells great treasure? A clown fishes Nemo. Is he more of a clown or more of a fish? Do we really need to know? Do we have to quantify the proportions, reduce personality to numeracy? What is a number anyway? In all fairness, equally, what is a word? Consider the conferment of our right to words. Is it for good? Is it for a legacy, for forever, towards doing good? 20,000 leagues under the sea, there was Captain Nemo. 20,000 light years in space, we have the galaxies and the stars. Granted, there's so much to explore somewhere out there, but why not deal with the elephant in the room, the kangaroos, the dead ends, the monkeys, giraffes, quokkas here on this shared earth we are living in and inhabit. Each one of us on the same earth with our personal inner space, our brains, our head knowledge, our lives, our hearts, our heartaches, our joys, our dislikes, disdain for rain, unless we need it. But we all need love and kindness. We all bleed red when we fall. You are not Nemo. You are not nobody. I am somebody. You are somebody. We just need to find and try to define who the somebody is. So this is finding somebody, and I think that each of us is unique. So it brings me to the next poem called Unique Like a Snowflake. And this is also written in the dual transplanted step form. And it has a special meaning for me as well. This was shared at Poetry Festival Singapore last year because, as I mentioned earlier, we are in Singapore and a snowflake has no place, no real place in Singapore because we will just melt away. But some of us might be snowflakes in a tropical place. So this is unique, like a snowflake. And okay, the other thing about this particular poem, Unique Like a Snowflake, is that we can mix the lines up. Lines, not stanzas. So we can just take a line from this stanza and read it with this line here from this stanza and so on. So you can randomize how you want to read the poem, which means that you can create your own poem out of this. And it also means that every time you read it in a different order of the lines, you get a different tone, a different ending, an entirely different feel to a poem that was, I mean, as it is now that is printed, it's just a different poem that you will get every time you jumble these lines. So this is unique, like a snowflake. Everything's changed. The glass is shattered, the mirror's silvered, no longer smooth-faced, though still stuck in shards, so sharp they are swords that sliced and lanced knots. There's a clotted plot. This does not belong to me, mi historia, 我的故事 isn't meant to be broken and forlorn, tattered, torn in doubt with an overcoat that's oversized, worn, to trap air to float. For some, it's easy to find buoyancy. They say it's their way. Pero yo soy único como un copo de nieve. Can you see my wounds in a melted mess, scars that have blended, turned into decaf? Have they lost their kick, fully sugarless? All is quite tasteless. The milk has run dry. You need to listen. I need to stop this thinking, feeling that only tears glisten. You all want me healed in reality, the reflection sealed in broken glass shards. Let me go unbound, hope. Please set me free. Release patience for my healing journey. This does not belong to trap air to float. No longer smooth-faced. For some, it's easy. Have they lost their kick? The milk has run dry. I need to stop this. Only tears glisten with an overcoat. There's a clotted plot. Let me go unbound. You all want me healed in reality.
Absolutely lovely. It's my tradition that after asking a poet to read their beautiful work, I offer one of my own as a little tribute. And so I'm going to offer you one, and then I'm going to have you join us and offer us one more. So this little poem is written for my friends, the poets. It's called A Friend. A friend is someone who laughs at you, even if you've escaped quite recently from the city zoo. A friend will stand by you through thick or thin, even if it seems you never win. A friend will hand over their umbrella even if they're generally ill-tempered and a suspicious fellow. A friend will even lend their dog if you're precariously teetering on a log. You may yet find a friend in me, even though I'm sinking in the deepest, sleepiest part of the Zyder Z. A friend.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, friend indeed.
May I ask you to read us one more, dear?
Okay, let's see whether I can find the, oops.
Those were
Okay.
lovely, by the way. I absolutely loved your work.
I'll do this one, which is called Orlando in Florida. Yeah. And this was nominated for the Pushcart Prize 2025 by Minority Literature. Tangerine blooms light up place like fire, in which yellow-orange juice flows from Florida. Armadillos in armor arrive uninvited. On this odyssey, embers glow. Breathing is labored. Enters Leopold Bloom. He keeps his leopard spots. The giraffe looks down at her patches, not useless. They are the subject of a constant stream that flows so petals bloom unconsciously. Would-be bards do not get stifled, even if it's barbs that bombard the bomberos. The firefighters, each one faces a private deluge. The debris, the wreckage caused by the first incendiary spark. There is no refuge safe, no sanctuary at the moment. The bells toll. The siren goes. A choice is made. A voice announces casting is complete. Orlando blooms in the rings. He's the elf Legolas, with ears that are pointed. In a way, they are like Antony, feelers with empathetic sensitivity. The bee listens and looks out for other bees, though not the queen. She's exempt. It's getting cold now. Winter's here. Summer's somewhere else. A fire started. It warms just nicely. Everything's fine now. Remember to attend, though, to the fire and the petals. Listen, pay attention. Sometimes water is needed. So, to let little seeds bloom, give them space and room. Vermilion blooms, peach blossoms, oranges from Orlando in Florida, Fame's framework in Pascua, Florida. Easter's fragrant bouquet is here, forever. Dandelions arise. The ember of the flame never dies.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the discussion and sharing as well. It's a real privilege. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you, and you have a wonderful day, okay?
Okay. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.